Welcome, I'm the Deadwood Jedi. This is a Raid Shadow Legends video. Hydra's out. I haven't done a video on it yet, mostly because I've been waiting for it to come out, and then when it did come out, I've been doing a lot of testing, just a lot of playing with it, honestly. Much like all of you, I had really, a couple ideas, like a lot of you had when you were looking at it beforehand, but I knew once we got into it, that's really where things were going to change. So there are some things we knew already. We knew Shamael was going to be great, right? Inquisitor Shamael, and he is. We knew Rector Drath or Duchess was going to be pretty essential as well. And they are. But outside of that, it was a little bit undetermined what ways are going to be effective against us, how effective the heads are against us, all the individual stats even. That was pretty recent. So I haven't had a whole lot of time to really dive into everything, but I finally had some time. I've done a couple runs. I did one run on purpose for a really good number. I did one run on accident for a very bad number. And I have one run left, which I'm going to be using all weekend, basically, just to test out some different teams and comps and see different ways that you can build these guys and try to find, more optimal stuff for my team. And I think that's one of the things to kind of consider. Well, as a content creator, I like to make content that's available to everybody. When you talk about stuff like this, just like the Demon Lord Clan Boss, with the Hydra Clan Boss, you're going to have to really figure out what works for your team. Not everybody has all the champions, right? There's some that you're going to definitely need, some that you just won't have, and so you're going to have to try to adjust with that. I've seen some really incredible comps already out there using a variety of champions. I'm not going to cover all of them, but what I do want to talk about today is some of the ways and methods in which that we can go about attacking the clan boss, this Hydra clan boss. So I'm going to show you two comps that I used already and kind of talk about the different ways that those work. And then I'm going to bring in this team that I have behind me in. And while that's going on, we'll talk about a couple other different variations of it. So without further ado, let's go into it. So as you guys can see, we already have a bunch of teams saved here, and there's a lot of them that I like. My first team that I ran was this one right above me here, where you got Mortu Macabre as your lead, Mashald, Lydia, Inquisitor Shamael, Tyrant Ixelmore, and then Godseeker, who's hidden behind my camera stand. But this was a really effective team, and there's a couple things that I've been realizing as I've been going through this. One, speed, as always, is really important. But most importantly, you need some AoE attack. It's really important. The Head of Mischief, the one that you can't target without Hex debuff, it's really, really tricky to get that out there on her. Now, there's only a few champions in this game that do AoE Hex anyway, and quite frankly, they generally suck. That's a pretty harsh way to say it, but they're not great. The problem with Hex is Hex by itself does nothing. It only works if you compare it with a champion that can utilize that buff. So as a debuff on its own, it's pretty trash in my opinion. And this is one of the reasons why we haven't seen a lot of Hex comps in general. And frankly, I've been completely ignoring it. I did one test with Ruel the Huntsman, who's probably the best Hex champion out there, and it was okay, but quite frankly, just didn't seem worth it at all. Not only do you have to have the accuracy to land it, and frankly, the debuffs don't land all the time. It's also, it doesn't stay up for the full fight. It's not like 4-turn durations or 3-turn durations even. So it's really tricky to set it up for himself and then utilize it. And this is the problem. We only have 6 champions. And you go, oh, that's way more than we have for any other stages. And that's true. But you need all 6. There's 4 heads to deal with that all have completely different abilities. And so being able to deal with all of those different heads, you have to bring in a bunch of different champions. And so to set aside, say, 2 champions to really maximize what Hex can do for you is really inefficient and tricky to do. So for me, I found the best result was just to ignore that. But the flip of that is you still have to do damage to that head on the side. And what that meant is AoE damage. And there's a couple ways to do that. Now, for me, I utilize a champion like Mashald. Mashald has this tornado ability right here, which places leech on everybody. And after that extra turn, I had him use his bloodsucker ability. Basically, he'll attack enemies under leech debuff. So he'll do a single attack and then attack everybody else that they have leech. Because of the way Mashald works, that means you're pretty much getting AoE attacks every single time. I even disabled his A3, which is a good skill. And, when I would manual it, I could utilize it in, spot moments. But generally, I would just rely on that leech debuff to get my AoE damage out there. That was really effective. Other champions like that, I brought in Tyrant Ixelmore. Now, Tyrant's not a great damage dealer, but what he does do is AoE HP burn. And this is one of the other things. HP burn is really strong here. Not only does it really affect the poison head, I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but and like do extra damage against him, but the HP burn affects all the different heads. And so being able to get that out is really, really helpful. So Tyrant is just super good with that AoE HP burn, not to mention the ally protection, increased defense buff. Those are really helpful for staying alive also. So I found him to be really helpful. One of the interesting things, and I should mention about Mortu. I really enjoyed using Mortu because Mortu does one other thing, and that Head of Mischief is probably the most tricky one out of all of them. But the thing that Mortu does, which is great, is this block buffs as an AoE. That's a huge, huge ability, and we need that. That Head of Mischief will steal your buffs and spread them to his allies. Now, sometimes you can just ignore it, and that's fine. But I found that I get a lot more mileage out of it by blocking those buffs. Now, look, I should, state this up front. None of these teams are game-breaking. None of them are one key on hard. And I did do all of my runs on hard. We beat normal very quickly. So I figured let's try it at the highest difficulty that I have available to me. And this team here did about 15 million, a little bit more than that, like 15.5 million or something like that. A pretty good result, right? It's a 2-key hard team. And so I thought that was pretty significant. Obviously, not game-breaking. And I know there are runs out there that are doing 30 million, 25 million. The truth of the matter is, I don't have the crazy dupes to be able to make those teams work, and I don't have the crazy gear to make those teams really, really work. So I think for a majority of players, you're going to be stuck at kind of this level. We're struggling to do somewhere between 5 and 10 million, even on normal, if not to mention on hard. So it can be a little bit challenging. One of the things that worked for me, like I said, HP burn, block buffs. I found those two things to be really, really effective, especially when I can bring in some AoE damage dealers. And that's what Mashald is. Mashald does damage. You can see I have good attack, crit damage, and crit rate. He's not only able to place the leech with that decent accuracy, but he's able to do good damage on top of that. It's really important. And then, of course, we have Inquisitor Shamael, who is like essential to all the best teams. And Inquisitor Shamael, I'll talk about him a little bit later, but like he has a broken ability right now. I honestly don't know what Plarium is going to do because it is like legitimately a broken ability right now. Broken in two senses. One, it doesn't work the way it's supposed to. And two, it is unbelievably OP. And honestly, if it worked the way it was supposed to, we'd be in trouble. But the way it is right now, there's some really smart ways to kind of cheese this. And that's where I'm going to talk about the second comp. Now, real quick, before I go too far into this, we'd also have Lydia. Lydia's fantastic. Also has a single target block buffs. That can still be very useful. The AoE decreased defense and weaken, of course, is helpful, not to mention the increased speed. She's a really, really good champion for this stuff. And Godseeker Neri is one of my favorites in this. And the reason why is Godseeker has this AoE heal. It's not a continuous heal, it's just an AoE heal. Not to mention can strip the buffs on the enemy, which again, with the Head of Mischief, helpful, and increase the duration of your buff. So when you bring in somebody like a Rector Drath, or somebody or a Duchess who's putting up that perfect veil and you need to keep that up, Godseeker Neri is going to be really, really helpful. On top of that, Godseeker Neri is a revive champion, right? Not only with the passive ability, but also with an active ability. That's really, really important. Also on that A1 does have an ability to heal as well. So the great thing about Godseeker Neri doesn't bring continuous heal into the comp. So that can't be stolen, can't be spread. You don't have to worry about the other heads healing off of your heals. But at the same time, she'll help keep the rest of your champions alive, not only with the passive revives, the active revives, but also with the heal abilities on all of her skills. A really good champion to use, I would say. Now, another team that I was trying out, and this was my mistake team here, but it was really smart, and I actually got this off of watching a video from Agard, a French streamer, definitely somebody you guys might want to check out. He did a live stream of it. I thought it was actually a really smart approach to it, and utilized a champion that I hadn't thought about. Now, I'd been thinking about this. The way Inquisitor Shamael, I'm never going to say his name right, the way Inquisitor Shamael works is every time a fear debuff is placed, he will then counterattack and cleanse that debuff and place and give everybody a turn meter boost. So basically, here's how it works. Each crit hit fills his turn meter by 7.5%. Whenever an ally receives a fear, true fear debuff, this skill instantly removes the debuff and fill the ally's turn meter by 15%. And so that's a really, really smart thing. Every time a debuff is placed, he uses his A1 skill as well. Now, the attack can't be critical. It only deals 50% of the normal damage, but he gets that all the time. Now, here's the crazy thing. So every time that happens, and with the head, I believe, of Torment, he places fear every time you attack him. It's nuts. So he works really well. He's going to cleanse it so your champions never suffer from fear, but he's always going to be getting these constant counterattacks. And every time he counterattacks, guess what happens? He gets feared. And so this becomes this crazy cycle where he's constantly attacking and giving turn meter buff to your allies. Now, the interesting thing about this is this passive ability here, where each critical hit fills this ally's turn meter, and when an ally receives a fear or true fear debuff from an enemy, this skill instantly removes the debuff and fills the ally's turn meter by 15%. Now, I don't feel like that's working quite right, but what's interesting is it's basically filling the leader spot. Whoever's first in your team order, they're the one getting the turn meter boost. So, in my previous team, I had Mordu Macabre there. And one of the great things about that ability is he's constantly getting these 15% turn meter boosts. So his turn meter is full almost the entire fight, which means he's constantly going through his skills and he's able to keep this block buffs up a very, very significant amount of the time. So depending on who you want to keep taking that turn, that can be a really, really powerful thing. So who you have as leader with Shamael is really, really strong and important. With this team, the champion we have in the lead is Skartosis, and Skartosis is really good. I wanted to disable this, but I didn't. But basically what he does is on this A1, he has a chance to steal random buffs from the enemy. So when you're dealing with the Mischief Head, that's pretty good. It's an AoE hit that's really strong. He also has this Rebirth ability, which cleanses allies and then heals them. So and also fills their turn meter. So it's a really strong combination ability there. And with this team, it's basically all AoE champions. And this is something I kind of thought of using Skullcrown and Sinesha. They're one of the strongest hitting A1 champions in this game. And being able to combine these two along with a champion like Ray, who places decreased defense on that A1, a champion like Skartosis, who can strip the buffs off the enemy, and Inquisitor Shamael becomes an incredibly, incredibly effective combination. Now, I had an Arbiter in there. My champions aren't very tanky. They're not really going to survive very well. I brought an Arbiter basically to be able to revive them. The hardest part with this type of team is they are real squishy. So keeping them alive is a little bit of a trick, and I think that would take some finessing to figure out the best way to do this, but boy, it was very effective. Easily took down the Head of Torment right away. After that, though, if the Head of Torment didn't come back, we were a little bit in trouble because we weren't getting that constant turn meter boost. So definitely something to keep in mind, but if you're struggling early on, just the combination of Shamael, Sinesha, Skullcrown, and a couple healers can be really, really effective. So that's definitely something I would keep in mind as far as building this team. I know Agard took this team and did like 25, 35 million damage with it, which is really significant. I don't really remember which difficulty it was, but it was super, super effective. So there's a lot of potential with that. And then the team I'm looking at right now, I think is one that most of you are going to be able to do pretty successfully because it involves Ninja. And boy, Ninja is just insane for this. I mean, honestly, one of the best champions you can use as far as damage dealing. Not only does he hit decently hard, but this hail burn, being able to throw out those HP burns and deal damage right away with those is really, really effective, guys. I cannot stress that enough. This is one of the best AoE skills that there are. I know those are 3 individual hits, which also helps because that means they're not affected by the AoE damage reduction from the bosses. But on top of that, you're getting 3 HP burns all at once that can really knock down their HP, their levels really quickly. Can be very, very effective. Lady Kimmy is another insanely good champion, mostly because this not only does it give increased accuracy and increased speed to your champions, can place block buffs if she strips something, but also places a decreased speed and a decreased accuracy debuff. Really, really effective. Putting decreased speed on them means you guys get to go faster. Decreased accuracy means you don't have to worry as much about the bosses stealing your buffs or placing any other debuffs on you. It's a really, really powerful ability, and obviously constantly speeding up your entire team, not to mention her passive, which is really good. Every time a debuff is placed, your turn meter goes up. So it's a really, really strong ability. And then with this kind of a team, I brought in a couple damage dealers. We brought in a Trunda, and I know some of you have seen the videos of Trunda doing 1,000,000 damage, 1.5 million damage, which is just insane. But this Cloak of Ages skill is just very, very strong. We're actually prioritizing the Forge Rhythm. The big AoE is also really effective, but it's the Cloak of Ages that's really going to be the big one for you. So that's really the one that you're going to want to prioritize when you're using her. She's a wonderful damage dealer for this. I even brought my Solus in, another one of my arena nukers, and he hits really, really hard too. Very, very effective, this Wave of Despair. It's a triple hit. It's a very strong ability. So one of the things that we want to know is that you do need big time damage dealers, right? You're going to need some, either you need all AoE damage dealers, or you do need a couple single target ones to be able to pop those heads when they swallow your champions. That's really, really important. HP burn actually does most of the work for you, especially in the early going, but you need a couple turns to make it work. And eventually, once the boss swallows your champions, it goes down to a 2-turn swallow. There's not enough time for the HP burns to do all the work for you, so you do need some damage dealers on top of that. But that's why a champion like Ninja is so good, because really, by himself, can almost ensure that your champions aren't getting swallowed, which is great. The other champion I have in here is Ugo. Ugo is phenomenal, because not only does it have the AoE decreased defense, which is helpful for dealing damage, but it comes with a block buffs ability. So he's really good. Not to mention his Ugo Brew, which is a nice little cleanse, right? Removes 1 debuff, heals everybody, and can revive as well when everybody's dead. Not to mention a nice little leech on the A1 can be kind of useful from point to point. So really good champions. I mean, I don't know if you were paying attention to the stats. They're all going to have a pretty significant accuracy. I haven't really tuned this team. I haven't tuned it for speed. I haven't tuned it for accuracy. So, and what I mean by that is I haven't built it in relation to what the heads are doing against us, right? When you know the resistance of your enemy, you can tune your accuracy. You can set it to a level that's optimal, right? I haven't done that really. I haven't really dove in that deep into it. I just kind of want to feel the mechanics and get a sense of what this boss is going to do. Same thing with the speeds. I know that if the fastest head is, say, 200 speed, then by having everybody at least 200 speed or a little bit faster, I know that we're going to get at least 1 turn per head turn, right? At least, if not more than that, because I know all the heads have like slightly different speeds and stuff. It doesn't mean I have to put it in the calculator to speed tune something. I just need to know relative to what they are. It's much like doing dungeon runs, right? I know that to go against a spider, if I want my Cold Heart, for example, to get 2 hits before the spider mother gets a second turn, I need to have her have like 195 speed, 200 speed, something like that. Basically above that like 193, 194, and 195 mark. That's speed tuning for dungeons. It doesn't have to be specific. I don't have to necessarily know all the numbers intimately. I just need to know how fast does this champion need to be for the ability I need to have happen fairly regularly. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. You can speed tune your champions. It's just not going to be something that you're like plugging into the calculator and having it be perfect, but you can tune it enough so that you know this champion's going to go, then this champion's going to go, and that order is going to generally maintain. Now, obviously, we're stealing champions from our arena teams, from our Doom Tower teams. It's not like we have the full flexibility to fully build, I don't anyway, to fully build a Hydra team for Hydra solely. And the rewards aren't there enough for me to do that either. I mean, they're decent, but they're nowhere near what I really want for that. So that's just kind of one of the things. So let's go ahead. Let's do a run. I just kind of want to talk a little bit about the heads, strategies to go about them, and then we'll kind of come back and I'll talk about some other champions that I found some success with, some things that can work really good for you, and some ideas I have as far as, utilizing these champions in the future. So I'm just going to kind of let this one play on auto. A lot of times I actually like manualing this, but we're going to let this play on auto and we'll just kind of see how it goes. And you can see already how effective Ninja is. We're already up to 500,000 damage right off the bat there. Ugo with the block buffs is really effective. So when that head right there tries to steal him, it's not going to happen. The decreased accuracy from Lady Kimmy, the block buffs from Ugo, it's going to prevent the buffs from going on even if they steal them, and the decreased accuracy is going to make it so, even with a moderate resistance level, they're not going to be able to steal it. So these are little things that can be really helpful. And you can see we're already got a couple of these heads pretty far down, which is very effective for us. Now, I really like using Solus and using Trunda and using Ninja because they're big damage dealers, but they have like AoE damage dealing abilities. It's not all single target. That's really helpful when trying to take down this stupid Mischief head, which is super annoying over there in the corner. And so I find that really helpful. We're able to take that down and take it down a lot faster because of that. I've done this with, single target damage dealers. It becomes a lot harder to do. Possible, but a lot harder to do. And so for me, I like having that kind of balance with it. Now, there are, what do we have? 4 different heads here, right? Each one has its own thing. I think we talked about Mischief a fair amount. The reason why I like talking about it is it's so crucial for us. It is easily the most difficult head to deal with, right? And so one of the big things with that head is, of course, that it steals your buffs and then it spreads them to the other heads out there, the other Hydra heads. Very, very difficult, something that you definitely want to be careful of. And the best way to be careful about that is simply to block the buffs. I think that's the biggest thing. Another thing to be careful of are what buffs you bring in. You bring in block debuffs like you get from a Brogni can be really tricky because if that goes on all the enemies, you're kind of in trouble there. You can also bring in if you bring in counterattack, you got to be real careful with that. Champions like Valkyrie or Martyr can be very, very dangerous because if counterattack gets stolen, boy, that is nothing but agony trying to deal with that. So you got to be careful with that. There are alternate ways to deal with it too, though, right? You can bring in buff strippers, champions like Thalia, Madame Ceres. Those can be really effective. Even champions like Godseeker and Neri, Underpriest Brogni, Lady Kimmy, they have some, minor buff removal ability. It can be effective doing that too. It's just a little bit more challenging, so you got to just be careful with that. We also have, and then I think that kind of covers Mischief there. The other head we got to be careful, Head of Suffering. Head of Suffering I haven't really worried about too much. He does place a provoke on you, and that can be pretty annoying, but I haven't really had much issue with that, frankly. It hasn't been much of a thing. He has this Pain Leak thing. Again, hasn't really been much of an issue trying to deal with that, so I haven't worried about that. The provoke basically goes on whoever has the highest crit damage. It's not usually a big thing to deal with. And you can see we got swallowed, and you can see that green buff up there in the corner. This one's on the Head of Decay. He swallowed one of our champions. I think it's Ugo that got swallowed, or Trunda that got swallowed. You see how effective Ninja is, just whack with that AoE HP burn, and we don't really even have to worry about it. It's not even a thing trying to deal with that. So really, really effective. We also have, let's see. The one thing about this Head of Decay is obviously he cleanses the debuffs. It's very annoying. You also lose your max HP, as you can see on my champions there. It's a thing you just kind of got to deal with. There's nothing you can do about the max HP loss. You need a heal. There's no avoiding that. So it's not something that I would really concern myself with. Just know you're going to have less HP in this fight than you would normally. The cleanse is obviously something that you can kind of time around a little bit. But it's just a thing that's going to be happening. But, if you have your team right, you're putting up the debuffs over and over anyway. The one thing it prevents is to prevent somebody like Vizier constantly extending debuffs and having that be an effective strategy. So that's simply something that's not going to be an effective strategy for us going forward. And then, of course, we have the Head of Torment. This is the other tricky one, right? This is why we have Rector Drathin. This is why we have Inquisitor Shamael, because of that fear debuff, the true fear debuff that gets placed every time you attack him. That is obviously the most annoying thing in the world. And so bringing in cleansers can be really effective. Champions like Battle Khazar can be really, really good for that. You can't block it. All you can do is cleanse it, remove it, or prevent it with champions like Inquisitor Shamael or Rector Drath. Really, that's kind of your option there. So it's a real annoying head, but it also enables a lot of crazy things with Inquisitor Shamael. So that's something else to kind of keep in mind. There are 2 other heads. There's a poison head. I can't remember the name of it, but it's real annoying because it has this thing where it places this poison cloud and you can't crit. That can be really, really tough. So again, a case where having an AoE damage dealer can be really, really helpful. And then obviously there's the Head of Wrath, and that's a difficult one because that one deals a ton of damage, guys. Just a ton of damage. Real tricky to kind of deal with that guy. But you can see this type of team is very effective, having those AoE and strong damage dealers. we're knocking these heads down repeatedly. So even if something else comes up, we should be pretty solid here. One thing I definitely encourage you, bring in a reviver, whether that's Rector Drath, Godseeker Aniri, Arbiter's a really good one. I don't generally like Sify just because, again, those block buffs ability, when that gets stolen and spread, that's real annoying. But otherwise, she's a phenomenal champion. But you need somebody to be able to revive your champions. What do you call it? Silda Drake is always a great option as well. There's just a bunch of different ways that you can go about building a team and having that revive in there that I think could be really good for you. This is a pretty solid team here. This is definitely my highest damage dealing team, I think. If I let it run through, which I don't think we're going to do today, so I can continue to play around with it. But you can see really effective overall. Trenda's ability there is just insane. I think you saw that 500,000 damage being done to one of the heads. But yeah, I find HP burn to be really good. It gives you a steady dose of damage, of AoE damage, on top of what your individual damage dealers can do. And there's other ones that we can bring in, right? Like one champion I think would be a really good option to bring in that I didn't, but I think would be smart to like kind of test out and try would be Herndig. AoE decrease defense, AoE decrease accuracy, really, really effective. AoE weaken, and HP burn as well, possibility with that. He's obviously a really good damage dealer, hits really hard, single target or AoE. That can be a really, really strong type of champion to bring in here. Ray, as we kind of talked about before, with that AoE decreased defense is very nice. She does have a buff strip, which is really good as well. And so champions along those lines, right? There are some crazy broken things, like you can bring in Rorik Wormbane along with Inquisitor Shamael. That can have a really nasty effect with each other. There is a thing with Shamael, because every time those fears get placed, they get placed and then they get cleansed. So if you take the mastery that allows you to counterattack with that, every time a fear gets placed, be very effective on your champion. So putting a retaliation set on Inquisitor Shamael can be really, really helpful. Now, this is obviously the most annoying thing in the world. When they put the shield, that weird shield along with the digesting, that's just a pain in the butt. Just a pain in the butt to deal with. Real annoying. Not a fan of it. But, what can we do other than groan and try and deal with it? And now you can see we are in trouble here. And this is pretty much going to do it for us. We lost both of our revivers. Ugo's down. Rector Drath is down. Because of that, we don't really have any options, any future for this team. And that's, the Head of Wrath does a lot of damage. But, we did almost 12 million damage. I think that's pretty solid. So we'll leave it here. And you guys kind of get an idea of, like, this is, ways you can do this. Now, there are plenty of other champions that I definitely recommend as far as champions you can bring in for something like this. I had some limited success with Leorius the Proud. I think I would have to build him better to make him work, but definitely an interesting champion. I actually had a lot of really fun success with Necrit the Great, which I thought was interesting. Getting extra attacks in, the ally attack ability that he kind of has in there is really, really strong. Not to mention his ally protection ability, which can't be stolen. That's also really, really strong. I think there's definitely some potential for Whirlim, bringing that decreased accuracy again, really effective. And so he has that ability on him. I think that could be really good. Not to mention he has a strengthen buff, an increased defense buff, both of which are really valuable. I had some fun with Krisk, but I have to tell you, when they steal buffs, having Krisk on your team is not an advantage. He just has so many buffs that he places on your allies. So good, but limited in his effectiveness. Just something kind of be aware of there. I tried Jintoro, just didn't really do enough damage. Too much single target, honestly, just wasn't as effective. Kind of the same thing with Rotos. I think there's definitely some potential for a champion like Rotos in a team, but it's going to take some time for him to build up to be really effective. But obviously his single target damage dealing ability is really extensive, really good. So there's definitely some really good, strong potential in there. Champions like Kymar can be really nice, right? Not only does he have a buff strip, he has an AoE poison on his A1, and he also has that A3 to reset your skills. That can be really effective for you. I did some poison explosion testing. Wasn't really worth it. I did some bomb testing. wasn't really worth it. So I don't recommend doing either of those. But champions like Tyrant, even Crypt Lord, Crypt King Grawl with the AoE HP burn can be really effective. Champions like Lord Chamford has a really nice passive that places a decreased speed. And so he was actually not a bad champion. But again, mostly single target, does have an AoE decreased attack and decreased accuracy. So there is definitely some usage for him, but you just have to build the right team around him. It gets a little bit trickier. Let's see, who else did I kind of test out? I didn't have a chance to test out Septimus yet. I thought Tomb Lord was phenomenal. You got decreased speed, decreased attack, decreased defense, and AoE poisons. Now, the poisons debuffs aren't as effective as they would be for other builds, other areas of this game, but they were still effective as an AoE damage source. So definitely something that I would keep in mind. In the same vein, Orgrim was pretty useful. He does have that continuous heal buff, so you got to be kind of careful with that. It's definitely something you're going to want to keep in mind. And so, but the two of them I thought were actually very, very effective. Demitha, not so much. Interesting thing about the boss with the head of Mischief. Can steal block buffs, block debuffs, block damage, can steal block damage, can steal unkillable. So you gotta be real careful what you're bringing into your team. Now, unkillable, it doesn't really matter, but block damage, that's a big negative thing. So I do not recommend bringing in champions like Tower, like Demitha. If you do, you just have to be really careful. You either need someone that can block buffs, in which case Tower is actually a really good option because he has that in his kit already, or you need to bring some buff stripping ability within your team. If you can do that, I think it can be really good. You're not going to be able to tune in and have it up 100% of the time, right? It's just not possible. The fact that they're stealing buffs is going to make it a problem. The fact that they're true fearing you is going to make it a problem. But you can still protect your champions. When you don't take damage, you simply don't take damage. That's a good thing. So it can still be a really useful buff. I would definitely not recommend Demitha, but I do think that in exchange, I think Tower, Roshkar the Tower is a good option there. You know, I actually thought Ursula the Mourner, was a really nice option I was trying with early on, somebody I'd recommend. Same thing with Mordecai, AoE HP burn, turn meter boost for your allies, increase attack buff for your allies, can be really, really effective. There's plenty of options here, lots of champions that can be good for you. In the same sense, like somebody like Vogoth can be helpful in keeping your champions alive. Akoth can be really good for getting that HP burn out there. Same thing with Stagnite with decreased defense, decreased attack as an AoE, not to mention the decreased speed. I thought Deacon Armstrong was really effective for me, honestly, and the couple times that I tried him. So that's somebody to keep in mind. But one of the things I would say, just generally, you're looking for all those debuffs that you want. You're looking for some buffs, but not crazy stuff. And one of the ones I generally will say you probably want to stay away from are continuous heals. Champions like Battle Khazar, Reliquary Tender, who I absolutely love, she's going to struggle in this because most of her healing comes from that continuous heal buff, and those can get stolen. And when they get stolen and spread to the enemy, you're actually healing your enemy. That's not generally the way you're going to want to go. So keeping those things in mind, there's definitely a ton of options, tons of champions. These are the champions that I have pulled out of my vault, but I have a ton more champions in the vault. There's so many champions in this game. There are so many options as far as ways to go about this, guys. You know, I brought in a man-eater, not super effective, to be honest with you. But there's so many different options here. I would love to try Royal Guard. I think he could be really, really effective. Obviously, the max HP damage is significant. I've heard some people have some success with champions like Seer. Doom Priest is obviously going to be very good, especially with those fear debuffs, being able to cleanse those. I've seen some effective stuff with champions like Akoth. There's, you know, even Geomancer I've seen have some real success, even though it's not an AoE HP burn that he lands. I've definitely seen some success there. And of course, if you can, you know, do some buff spreading or debuff spreading, that can be really effective bonus. I think champions like, you know, Suwai, the Firstborn, can be really effective as well. With the single target, real damage dealing abilities, but also the AoE decrease attack can be very nice. So there's tons and tons of champions in this game, and I think they can all be really, really effective for you. It's just about building that team right. So as we start playing with this, as we start recognizing some better synergies, I'll definitely be able to give you guys some more specific advice as far as, you know, champions you want to bring, builds that you want to do, combinations that can work really nicely. But, you know, I think the big thing is you're going to want to make sure you have decreased defense out there pretty much the whole fight. You're going to want to try and get block buffs out there the whole fight. you need a Rector Drath, a Duchess, or a Shamael. There is no real alternatives to them. That's going to be really, really important for you. Or a Doom Priest, I think, can be effective substitution as well. But you're going to need one of those champions. It's really, really difficult not to. And then on top of that, you need some kind of AoE damage. Now, you can obviously build your teams to try and survive a long time. You're probably not going to get the damage output that you'd want. I've found all of my teams have been more successful dealing damage early rather than trying to sustain a long time and deal damage over time. So I would definitely prioritize getting the damage in early over later on, especially the fact that if you're using Shamael and really relying on his passive abilities to do the work for you, once that Head of Torment is down, you don't know that you're going to get it back. And if you don't get it back, that can be real problematic. So anyway, guys, this is a lot of stuff. There's going to be tons more coming out. We're obviously all just getting a first look at this, trying stuff out. It's very, very exciting and interesting. And I'm really, honestly, there's some stuff I don't like about the Hydra Boss, but in general, I'm really glad we have some new content that's really interesting and forcing us to be really creative in how we build our teams to go about doing it. So hopefully this was helpful for you guys. If you need any more stuff, I'll try to have some more videos out soon. But yeah, till next we meet, I'm the Deadwood Jedi.